The coffee was already cold by the time I heard the front door slam. I didn't move from my chair. I just sat there at the kitchen table, both hands wrapped around the mug, staring at the steam that had long since stopped rising. Outside, a cardinal landed on the fence post near the garden, the same fence I'd built with my own two hands 31 years ago, when this land was nothing but wild grass and red clay. My son's truck was gone. I could tell by the sound of it. That diesel engine, the way it rattled at idle and then roared when he hit the gas. I knew that sound the way I knew my own heartbeat. I was 67 years old, and I was living in a room at the back of my son's house. That's what I told people when they asked. My son's house. I'd been saying it so long I'd almost started believing it myself. My name is Walter. I spent 34 years as a pipe fitter, working jobs from Louisiana to Wyoming, saving every dollar I could because my wife, Carol, always said the same thing every time I came home smelling like grease and iron. One day, Walter, we're going to have something that lasts. She meant land. She always meant land. Carol grew up poor. The kind of poor where you move every year because the rent went up and your daddy didn't argue, just packed the boxes. She wanted roots. She wanted something with a deed that had our name on it. So that's what I gave her. In 1987, I bought 42 acres outside of Clarksburg, Tennessee, paid cash for the first 10, financed the rest, and spent the better part of a decade paying it down while we raised 2 boys and a yard full of chickens. Carol planted a garden that took up half an acre. She grew tomatoes, squash, okra, and sunflowers along the fence line because she said a house needed something pretty to look at from the road. She died in 2019, pancreatic cancer, 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. After that, the land felt too big for just me. The garden went unplanted. The chickens were gone. I rattled around in that house like a single marble in an empty coffee can, and my older son, Derek, called one evening and said, "Dad, why don't you come stay with us for a while, just until you find your footing?" I thought he meant a few months. That was 4 years ago. Derek was 41. His wife, Pamela, was 39. They had a house in a suburb outside of Nashville, 3 bedrooms, a 2-car garage, a neighborhood where all the lawns looked the same because there was apparently a committee that made sure of it. They had one daughter, my granddaughter, Riley, who was 14 when I moved in and had Carol's same habit of humming while she read. For the first year, things were fine. I helped where I could. I fixed the gutters, replaced the water heater, rebuilt the back deck that had started to sag on the left side. Pamela seemed to appreciate it. Derek was working long hours at the logistics company he managed, and having an extra set of hands around the house made things easier for everyone. But something shifts when a person stays too long in someone else's space. I'm not sure when it happened exactly. There wasn't a single moment I could point to and say, that's where things turned. It was gradual, like water damage. By the time you notice it, the rot has already spread. Pamela started making comments, small ones at first, about the TV being on too loud, about me leaving a dish in the sink, about the way I parked my truck in the driveway at an angle that she said made it hard to back out, though I'd watched her back out just fine 100 times. Derek didn't say much. He'd come home tired and eat dinner and nod along to whatever Pamela said and then disappear into the garage to work on a motorcycle he'd been rebuilding for 3 years. Riley would sit with me in the evening sometimes. She'd bring her homework to the kitchen table and we'd sit in comfortable quiet, me with my coffee and her with her books. Sometimes she'd ask me about Carol, and I'd tell her things about how her grandmother used to sing off-key to the radio while she cooked, about the time we drove to Montana just because Carol had seen a photo of Glacier National Park in a magazine and decided we were going. Riley would listen with her chin in her hand, and for an hour the house felt like a place I belonged. Those evenings got rarer as the second year wore on. Pamela had started keeping a mental ledger. I could feel it. Every meal I ate, every load of laundry I ran, every light I left on it was all being tallied somewhere. She'd make remarks at dinner about how expensive groceries had gotten, and then look at me a half-second longer than necessary. Derek would study his plate. Riley would pretend to be very interested in her green beans. One Saturday morning in March, I came downstairs to find Pamela sitting at the kitchen table with a piece of paper and a pen. She said, without looking up, that she and Derek had been talking. About what? I asked. She set the pen down and folded her hands. She had a way of doing that, folding her hands, sitting up straight, that made me feel like I was being called into an office. About the arrangement, she said. You've been here 2 years now, Walter. And we love having you. She paused in a way that made the word love sound like a figure of speech, but we need to talk about what this looks like going forward. This house costs money to run. The utilities alone. I pay for my groceries, I said. I've offered to pay more. It's not just groceries. She slid the piece of paper across the table. We think $700 a month is more than fair. I looked at the paper. She'd written it out. $700, due the first of each month, with a line at the bottom for my signature. I sat down slowly. You want me to sign this? It's just so everyone's clear, she said. Derek agrees. I looked toward the hallway. Derek was not in the room. I didn't sign it that day. I told her I'd think about it. She nodded and picked up her pen and went back to whatever she'd been writing, like the conversation was already over. That night, I lay awake in the back bedroom and stared at the ceiling and thought about Carol. I thought about what she would have said. She would have been angry not at me, but for me. She had a quiet fury that could fill a room without raising her voice. But she also would have told me to think clearly. Don't react, she used to say. Respond. I started paying the $700, not because I agreed with it, but because I wasn't ready to leave, and I wasn't ready to fight, and I needed time to think. The months that followed had a rhythm to them that I didn't like. I paid on the first. I stayed out of Pamela's way. I ate earlier or later than the family to avoid the tension that had started collecting around the dinner table like weather. Derek and I barely spoke beyond logistics, whether the recycling had been taken out, whether the truck was blocking the garage, whether I was going to be home for dinner. The one bright spot was Riley. She was 15 now, and she'd started asking me to teach her things, how to change a tire, how to read a weather pattern by looking at the clouds. She was sharp in a way that reminded me of myself at that age, curious, practical, not interested in doing things halfway. We spent a Sunday afternoon fixing the latch on the back gate, and she didn't ask me to hand her tools. She just picked them up and figured it out. And I stood there watching her and felt something loosen in my chest that had been tight for a long time. Grandpa, she said, without looking up from the latch, do you like living here? I didn't answer right away. I like living near you, I said finally. She looked at me then. She had Carol's eyes. That same clear, direct way of looking at a person that made you feel seen. That's not the same thing, she said. No, it wasn't. Things came to a head in October. I'd been coming and going more than usual. I had some business to take care of. Meetings in Clarksburg, a few calls to make. I didn't explain much because I didn't feel I owed an explanation. I was 67 years old and I was paying rent and I was a grown man. Pamela didn't see it that way. One evening I came in from a drive and found her and Derek both in the kitchen, standing, which was unusual. The overhead light was on even though there was still daylight coming through the window. Riley was not in the room. Pamela started talking before I'd gotten my jacket off. We need to talk about your situation, she said. The word situation landed oddly, like I was a problem to be managed. All right, I said. You've been coming and going at odd hours. You're clearly making plans of some kind that you haven't shared with us. And frankly, she glanced at Derek. We're not comfortable with the uncertainty. We need to know whether you're committed to this arrangement or not. What does committed mean to you? I asked. It means, she said, and her voice had gone tight, that if you're going to keep living here, we need to formalize things. A proper lease, 12-month minimum, $900 a month. I looked at my son. He was standing with his arms crossed and his eyes on the floor. He had his mother's jawline, Carol's jaw, And seeing it there while he looked away from me did something uncomfortable to my stomach. "Derek," I said. He looked up. "Is this what you want?" He uncrossed his arms, put his hands in his pockets. "We just think it's fair, Dad." I nodded slowly. I picked up my jacket from where I draped it over the chair. I said, "I'll need a few days." "Take the week," Pamela said. "But after that, we'll need an answer." I went to my room and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and thought for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and called my attorney. What Derek and Pamela did not know, what I had never found reason to mention, was that I still owned the 42 acres in Clarksburg, and the farmhouse on it, and the 2 outbuildings. I had never sold it after Carol died. I couldn't. Not at first because it felt like giving her away, and then later because something told me to wait. I'd been talking to a developer for the better part of a year, a man named Garrett, who drove a white truck and wore the same green jacket every time we met, and had been very patient and very consistent. He wanted the land for a residential development. The area had grown. Clarksburg wasn't the sleepy county seat it used to be. New roads, new jobs, people moving out of Nashville looking for space. Garrett had offered me $1.1 million. I had spent those months in quiet deliberation talking to my attorney, talking to a financial advisor, walking the property one more time in the early morning fog and saying goodbye to it the right way, saying goodbye to the fence posts, to the garden plot, overgrown now but still outlined in the earth like a memory, to the sunflowers Carol had planted along the road, which came back wild every summer on their own, because that's what she would have wanted. I signed the papers on a Thursday. The closing was on a Friday, 3 weeks later. I drove down to Clarksburg alone, sat in a conference room with Garrett and 2 lawyers and a notary, and signed my name where they told me to. Afterward, I sat in my truck in the parking lot and allowed myself 5 minutes. I looked at the deposit confirmation on my phone, $1,080,000 after fees, sitting in an account that had only my name on it. Then I drove back to Nashville. I didn't say anything to Derek or Pamela. I gave them my answer about the lease. I said I needed more time, which bought me another week. I spent that week making arrangements. I found an apartment in a complex near the river, 2nd floor, east-facing windows, a small porch where I could have my coffee in the morning. I signed a lease. I paid the deposit. I arranged to have my things picked up on a Saturday when Derek and Pamela would both be at Riley's volleyball tournament. The Friday before I left, Riley found me in the backyard. I was sitting on the deck, the one I'd rebuilt, watching the light go out of the sky. She sat down next to me and didn't say anything for a while. "You're leaving," she said, eventually. It wasn't a question. "Yeah," I said. "Because of them." I looked at her. "Because it's time. There's a difference." She didn't look like she fully believed that, but she was smart enough not to argue. We sat together until it was full dark, and I told her about the apartment, and I told her she could come visit whenever she wanted, and I told her something I'd been meaning to say for a while, that I'd set aside money for her college. A real amount. Enough that she wouldn't have to worry. She went very still when I said that. "Grandpa, your grandmother would have done the same thing," I said. "Don't argue with me about it." She didn't argue. She leaned her head against my shoulder the way she used to do when she was small, and we stayed like that until Pamela called from inside that dinner was ready, and Riley straightened up and wiped her eyes quick, the way young people do when they don't want you to see. I moved out on a Saturday morning. It took 2 hours. I didn't leave a note. I had called Derek the night before and told him I was going, that I'd found my own place, that I wished them well. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Okay, Dad." That was all. I set up my apartment slowly, over the course of a week, the way I like to do things. I put Carol's photograph on the windowsill where the morning light would hit it. I hung a bird feeder on the porch railing. I bought good coffee beans for the first time in 2 years and made a full pot every morning and drank it hot, without rushing, watching the river through the trees. 3 weeks after I moved out, I got a call from Derek. His voice was different than I was used to, higher, tighter, like a rope being pulled. "Dad, There's something happening with the house. What kind of something? We got a letter from a company. It says the property it's talking about the Clarksburg address. It says the sale has finalized and new ownership will be taking possession, and we need to... Dad, it's talking about demolition permits. What is this? I let a moment pass. That's Garrett's people, I said. The developer. What developer? What are you? He stopped. Wait, Clarksburg, Mom's property. You sold. My property, I said. It was always mine, Derek. The silence that followed was the longest one in our recent history. You sold it, he said. Not a question anymore. Just the fact of it, landing. I did. Without telling us. It was mine to sell. I heard Pamela's voice in the background, asking what was happening. Derek told her to hold on. Dad. His voice had shifted again. Quieter now. And I couldn't quite name the quality of it. How much? I thought about whether to answer that. Then I decided honesty was the right policy. Enough, I said. Another silence. Then, we didn't know you still had it. We thought. I know what you thought, I said. You thought there wasn't much to think about. He didn't have an answer for that. We talked for a few more minutes, but there wasn't much to say. I hadn't done anything wrong. I hadn't hidden anything with any intention to deceive. I had simply lived my life quietly and minded my own business and not volunteered information that nobody had thought to ask about. That wasn't deception. That was privacy. After I hung up, I sat on my porch and watched a pair of sparrows chase each other through the oak tree at the edge of the parking lot. The air had the particular quality it gets in November, clean and cool and slightly melancholy, the way November always is. I thought about Carol. About the first time I took her to see the Clarksburg land before we bought it, before any papers were signed. It was just a field then, overgrown with goldenrod and blackberry brambles, and the house needed more work than either of us wanted to admit. But Carol walked the whole perimeter without speaking, and when she came back to where I was standing by the truck, she was smiling. This is it, she said. This is the one. I had known she was right. Some things you just know. Pamela called 2 days later. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was brief and careful, the way a message is when a person has thought hard about what they want to say and tried to remove any tone from it. She said she hoped I was settling in well. She said Riley missed me. She said that if I ever wanted to talk, they were open to it. I didn't call back that day, or the next. I wasn't punishing anyone. I just needed the space to decide what I actually wanted, which was something I hadn't gotten to want in a long time. What I wanted was simple. I wanted my son to call me because he wanted to talk, not because something had happened that required managing. I wanted Riley to be able to visit without it being an event that needed to be scheduled around Pamela's comfort level. I wanted to be a father and a grandfather and not a line item in someone's household budget. Whether any of that was possible, I didn't know yet. I started going to a woodworking class on Tuesday evenings at the community center near my apartment. The instructor was a retired school teacher named Bud who had opinions about wood grain and very little patience for shortcuts, and I liked him immediately. There were 8 people in the class, most of them younger than me, and none of them knew my history or my family or anything about me except that I was reasonably good at following instructions and I brought my own coffee. It was the first time in years I'd been somewhere where I was just Walter. Riley texted me a week after I moved out. She sent a photo of the back gate, the latch we'd fixed together with a single message, still holding. I smiled at that for a long time. I texted back, "Good work." She replied, "We did it together." I set my phone down on the porch railing and looked out at the river, and the morning light was doing something particular on the water, breaking into pieces, and I thought about how a life is not one thing but many things, and how the hard parts don't erase the good ones, they just sit alongside them. I thought about 42 acres of Tennessee clay, about a garden that grew sunflowers on its own, about a woman who always knew which land was the right land. "This is the one," she had said. And she had been right. She had been right about all of it. I picked up my coffee and drank it while it was still hot.